I am chatting with MP Michael Chong. Mr. Chong, thank you for taking time out of your schedule today. I know it's getting crazy closer to the holidays.
Not at all. Glad to be with you.
So we're talking about the Reform Act today, which is one of the biggest pieces of legislation to come around in decades, as some people have referred to it. What got you going on this piece of legislation?
Well, it's clear that decades of changes to Parliament have weakened the role of elected members of Parliament and centralized that power in the party leaders' offices. And so the Reform Act proposes three simple reforms to strengthen Parliament by restoring local control over party nominations, strengthening caucuses as decision-making bodies, and reinforcing the accountability of party leaders to their party caucuses.
Now, that's quite a load of content. I mean, there's some major core issues there. And one of the things that we've noted is that apparently that if passed, this would not commence until the next elected government. Is that correct?
That's right. It's, the problems that we have in our Parliament today are not the results of any one party or any one leader. They are the results of decades of changes made by different governments of different political stripes. This isn't about any of the current leaders in today's Parliament. In fact, the bill wouldn't come into force until after the next election. And so, I think the problem isn't with any of the current leaders of any of the current parties, it's with the rules. And the rules have changed over the last 40 years in a way that has weakened the ability of Canadian elected representatives to carry out their functions. And so the bill is an attempt to restore the balance between party leaders and elected members of Parliament.
And I think a lot of what you've done is amazing work, and I've seen people across different parties lay down their partisan feelings to support your legislation so far. So why wait until the next election if it's good enough to be passed by Parliament? Why not have it start as soon as it's passed?
Because I really wanted to be careful to make sure that the debate didn't become about any of the current personalities in this Parliament, that the debate didn't become about any issues around the current leadership in the House or the current leadership of the political parties. I think if it becomes a debate about personalities and the current leadership, then I think the debate has gone in the wrong direction. And so that's why I purposely put a coming into force clause in the bill that would not have it come into force until after the next election, so that people focus on the issue. And the issue is that our Parliament has substantially changed over the last 40 or more years away from the way it was originally set up to be, which is that the House of Commons, through its elected membership, represents Canadians and their views on the floor. And that power has been weakened in favor of centralization of power in the party leaders' offices.
Now,
I think we focus on the rule changes that led us to this point. We can then introduce reforms that will rebalance the system.
Now, I believe that since your first attempt to run as MP where you lost, you've been very successful, I think 3 times now, correct?
I've been elected 4 times now.
4 times, I apologize. Do you plan on running again in the next election?
I do. I believe strongly in our system of government. I feel invigorated by the support that I've received from my constituents over the last number of years. And so I'm committed to keeping up the fight for the things that the people I represent believe in.
Do you think it's going to be a whip vote, or is it going to be an open vote for the Conservatives?
Well, normally private members' bills are free votes for backbench members of caucus. Some private members' bills are free votes for all members of caucus, including the cabinet. We'll have to wait and see what the cabinet decides to do on this particular bill. But normally, private members' bills are free votes for the backbench.
Now, I'm sure you've put a lot of work into this bill, and there's a lot of meat in there. Were there any issues that or facets that you wanted to add to this, but you were hesitant because you weren't sure if they'd be passed or if they'd be palatable to the other parties?
At one point, I started working on the draft of the bill 4 years ago. At one point, I'd considered speaking to the issue of Senate caucuses, but decided not to. The Senate is an independent house in our Parliament, separate from the lower chamber, which is the people's elected chamber, the House of Commons. And so I decided not to do anything that had any impact on the Senate. The bill simply affects House of Commons caucuses and simply changes the rules for those caucuses.
Do you have an opinion on Senate reform, especially in light of what's happened this year?
Yeah, I think that the Senate does need to be reformed, but I think that we need to wait for the Supreme Court's decision before we proceed with any particular piece of legislation or with any particular plan if it involves the provinces. I believe strongly that the Senate does have a role to play in our system of government. I am not in favor of abolition. I think there are over 40 democracies that have bicameral legislatures, as they call them. In other words, legislatures with a lower chamber and an upper chamber. And there's a reason for that. You don't want to concentrate power in any one place in the system of government. I think just systems of government, fair systems of government, are ones where power is diffused through the system to provide checks and balances on power.
All right, and just switching gears a little bit, and hopefully this isn't too much of a curveball. Yesterday it was noted that Quebec is going to be getting more of a larger share this year, and Ontario a little bit less for the balancing payments. You actually resigned over the term of Quebec being a nation by the Harper government. It's very rare that someone takes that kind of strong action that you took. Can you explain that a little bit more for the public that's not aware?
Yeah, sure. In my view, the motion that recognized Quebec's nationhood in the House of Commons was one that said that Quebec was for francophones and the rest of the country was for anglophones. My view of Canada is one where francophones and anglophones have the rights and should have the ability to live in any part of the country. And so my view of that motion is that it ran counter to that spirit, the spirit of the Official Languages Act, the spirit of our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and the spirit of the country we've built over the last number of decades. One where, regardless of whether or not you're francophone or anglophone, Canada is your home. I think it also was something that was dangerous for the recognition of that nationhood was dangerous for anglophones living in the province of Quebec as much as it was dangerous for francophones living in the rest of the country. Look, I understand the need to protect the francophone minority in this country, but we shouldn't do so by restricting the rights of other minorities living in this country.
Well, especially when you see some of the legislation that's being proposed in Quebec.
Yeah, I've always believed that the federal government's role is to defend minorities throughout the country, whether that's francophones living in the rest of the country or anglophones and allophones living in the province of Quebec.
And
I'm quite proud. I'm quite proud of our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I think it's a foundational document that allows our government to defend those rights. And I'm happy to see that the government, under the Prime Minister's leadership, is taking this issue of minority rights to court in Quebec. And I think that's the right thing to do.
And again, switching back finally for the Reform Act, have you been surprised at the support you've seen from some of the other MPs in Ottawa?
I've been overwhelmed by the support that the bill has received. It's early days yet. It's just been introduced in the House of Commons. I expect that there will be vigorous debate over the various proposals in the bill, and I welcome that. But I've been overwhelmed by the support and humbled by it, frankly. It's heartening to see so many Canadians, including members of Parliament on both sides of the aisle, say that they support this legislation. It means that people do care about their democracy. They do care about Parliament, and that's a good thing.
And of course, it was, I believe, 2 years ago where you were all across the media for your suggestions on reforming how people behave in Parliament.
That's right. And the heart of that proposal to reform question period was really a part of what this bill is all about, which is to ensure that elected members of Parliament, the people's representatives, have the tools they need to represent their constituents on the floor of the House of Commons. So the heart of the proposal to reform question period was to restore the right of elected members of Parliament to stand in their place and represent their constituents by asking a question to government. And that's what this bill is all about. It's about ensuring that elected members of Parliament can stand in their place on principle, on issues of importance to their constituents, and give that voice to their constituencies in Ottawa.
And final question, sir, as we approach the upcoming 2015 election, in your opinion, especially since you stated that you're going to be running again, what do you think will be the biggest questions that people should be asking during the next election?
Well, I think they should be asking a variety of questions, one of which is, what do you believe the role of elected members of Parliament to be? Is it to represent their constituents in Ottawa, or is it to represent their party's views back to their constituencies? Look, I believe in the party system. I think parliamentary systems of government need political parties, need parliamentary parties to function, but there's a balance that needs to be restored. And so I think that's a very important question that people need to ask in the next election. Are you going to represent our views to Ottawa or Ottawa's views to us? And I think that's a very important question that needs to be asked.
It is, and I want to congratulate you again for this game-changing piece of legislation that most likely will, if passed, change the way Canada does politics at the federal level. Sorry, you cut out there.
Thank you for having me on your show, Jimmy.
All right. Thank you, MP Michael Chong.